There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Shawn, the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with the fourth and final in a series of discussion videos I'm doing for the Asian Readathon month, in which I and another booktuber or bookish collaborator of some sort read the same story by an Asian writer that's freely available online and then make a video like this to discuss it. And today I am delighted to welcome to my channel Grace Eickmeyer. Welcome, Grace.
Thanks, Shawn. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. And we are going to be discussing the Korean story Shoes by Choi Jung-wha, translated from the Korean by Stella Kim. Grace gave me a list of stories that she had found and was interested in discussing, and this is the one that we settled on. So the last thing I'll say before Grace and I dive in is these stories are short stories. They're freely available to you online. You should read the stories before you watch our discussion, and we're not going to worry about spoilers. That said, Grace, why don't you get us started?
Sure. Thanks, Shawn. So this story was a lot shorter, actually, than I anticipated. It was a little bit harder to sort of tell, given the way it was formatted in the online journal,
Right.
Asymptote, that I assume we'll link below for people who want to read it. And I thought it was a very tense sort of snapshot of Korean domesticity. And I found it very atmospheric and creepy just for the first kind of few lines even. So yeah, that was my immediate impression.
I'm nodding along to all that, and I thought that the kind of feeling of dread and suspense was established, like you say, very early and carried right to the last line. It was a strange story. So the premise of it is that Korean housewife, she's going away for, I think, 3 weeks, and she has advertised to get a housekeeper to come in to take care of her kids and cook and clean for her husband. So that automatically sets up an image in my mind of a very patriarchal kind of home life that if this was a Canadian or American short story, I don't think that we would be advertising for someone to come in and do those things. Very quickly, as soon as she lets this woman in, I guess she would, do we know anything about the interviewee's age, similar age, younger?
There's nothing about her appearance that I recall. The only sort of distinctive markers are about her class. It's stated pretty clearly that she's of a poorer economic background, which would be why she would be applying for this sort of short-term gig. And there's a lot of detail around her shoes, like the title suggests, and her coat. So just that she's poor.
And paradoxically, that she kind of walks in like she owns the place.
That's right. A little bit of Parasite vibes.
Parasite vibes. I haven't seen that, but and our first person narrator, the housewife, the interviewer, is immediately discombobulated by this woman and the way that she just kind of walks in and looks around and hangs her coat on the coat rack.
Yes, the sort of like presumption in that act, being too familiar with the environment when she's ostensibly interviewing for this position.
And then her choice of seat. She sits with her facing the TV instead of facing the other way at the table. There's a table in the living room, which I thought was strange, but that's fine. And what immediately became predominant for me was how flustered our narrator was. Like her composure was just shot. There's a brief period of the story about 2/3 of the way in where she regains her composure for very briefly, but she is so thrown off kilter by this woman.
Yeah, it's a little bit unclear, the housewife, if that's like her normal personality or if there's something peculiar to this encounter, right? And this woman's behavior, because later on when she's sort of reflecting on what's going on and even speaking to her husband says something to her like, oh, well, you've been a little bit kind of off recently. And so that is sort of an indicator to the reader that all may not be quite well with the narrator, and she might not be the most reliable person even telling about what is sort of off about this encounter with the outside woman.
Unreliable as a person and thus unreliable as a narrator.
Right.
I picked up on that a lot more on my second reading this morning, and noticed much more on the second reading who she's talking to. She's talking to a doctor.
Yes.
So
Right.
this is some kind of possibly psychiatric,
Mhm.
psychotherapeutic monologue that we are reading. And also what you said about the conversation she has with her husband in the bedroom, that she's actually going away to kind of get away from her life and deal with whatever personal issues she's having.
Yes.
The other woman's never named, is she?
No, I don't think anyone is.
So. The woman that's there for the housekeeping position, she actually asked her for a drink, and the housewife didn't want to make a drink, but she goes into the kitchen, and then the housekeeper woman meets the children, and they love her at first sight. And then the husband comes home, and because he's such a kind man, he invites her to stay for supper, and the housewife is just freaking out. She doesn't want her to stay. She wants to get rid of her. At this point, I think the question of the unreliable narrator becomes paramount. A lot of the things that the housewife says and does don't make any sense to me. Because she's really threatened by this woman. She's really thrown off guard, but she keeps leaving this woman alone, with giving her more of a chance to get close
Ingratiate
to
herself.
Ingratiate herself is the perfect word. Yeah, she kind of goes into the living room in a huff because she's so upset she can't eat.
This is maybe a provocative question, but do you believe that this really happened? Like, do you believe that the other woman exists?
By the end, I didn't know what to believe. That's the perfect question. I hadn't thought about it quite to that degree, but it comes off so unreliable that, does she even have a family? Has she just been in a mental institution for a long time? It's really an open question. Did you like this story?
Yes, I did.
I did too. I have to say that I didn't like it as much the second time I read it, but I still liked it. What I thought was the flaw was I would have liked it better if it had had more gradations of the suspense or of the because it's literalized within the first paragraph or so that she feels like this woman is coming to take over her life, so that she tells us that instead of showing us that step by step, so that by the end, where even though we're not going to worry about spoilers, we don't need to describe in detail the ending, but it has something to do with the shoes. That would have been a much more powerful ending for me if she hadn't said in the first paragraph, this woman's trying to take over my life. So I didn't like that, but I still thought it was a good story. Yeah.
I see your point. That there could have been more like a rising action or a slow reveal.
That's right.
I think what I liked about it and thought was successful is that in a fairly short story, I like it when a writer is able to just maintain a tone or an atmosphere all the way through. But it did make sort of the middle section a little bit strange for me because, like, I think you mentioned this earlier, if she's that worried, why would she leave her alone, right? Or even in the middle section when she and her husband are sort of discussing what are they going to do? Are they actually going to hire this woman or not? And the housewife makes some interesting comments there that you're like, I don't know if this quite squares with what you are relating as your experience of this woman, right?
Yes, and the bedroom conversation I thought was just bizarre because she's so upset about this woman and her presumptuousness and the way that her family is taking to this woman. But when her husband goes in to change his pants, and that's a whole other issue that I think had kind of a sensual, there's a good word, aspect to it. But the housewife just, it doesn't even seem like she's feigning what she's saying. She can't control herself to kind of defend this housekeeper and kind of talk about her in a really positive way. Again, unreliable narrator. Is she just faking? What is she trying to do here? Talking about the housekeeper and kind of trying to apologize. So do we want to get into the spilled, do you know how to pronounce that food they were eating?
Jjigae, right? They're eating some sort of like leftover like noodle dish or something.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's important to the theme.
Yeah, it was certainly not boring, that part.
Yes. As you mentioned, the housewife leaves the kitchen or the eating area because she's too upset or just can't eat. And in the meanwhile, the housekeeper and the son and the husband are continuing the conversation. And the son asks a question, just, as kids do, like, what does this word mean, right? While he's asking, and while the adults at the table are sort of trying to come up with an answer that's suitable for him, the interviewing woman, the housekeeper, like ducks under the table and
drops a utensil.
Yes, she like
That's
goes
right.
to pick it up,
Yeah.
and it's like unclear. It's sort of implied that she's trying to give the dad privacy and also primacy to like answer the boy. And then when she comes back up, or at least that was how I read it, the dad answers with after a beat, so it's not too awkward. But then in the subsequent moments, the housekeeper spills the food onto the husband, onto his lap.
Yes.
And there's definitely like some physical or like sexual overtones.
Because she goes immediately to sponge
To
the
pat him down.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's how he gets into the bedroom to change his pants and has that strange conversation with his wife. Yes. Had you heard of this writer before?
No, I have not.
Choi Jung-wha. She is young, I would say, born in Incheon,
79.
1979. She's quite well known in Korea. And this is the first of her anything to be translated into English. When was this published?
It was translated for this magazine in April 2018.
Okay. Yes. It was a finalist for a literary award in Korea in 2012. So it's around that age. 1979. How old does that make her? I'm so
41.
Okay, so she's not really young, but she's pretty young. I would definitely read something else that got translated from her. Yeah, it was interesting. The kind of story, like I didn't absolutely love it, but I liked it well enough that I'm very curious about this writer. So
I agree with you. I think what could be extrapolated, and I do encourage people watching to read it, is there's big themes around the role of the woman in the house. And when you sort of look at the behavior of the housewife and what is upsetting to her and what's not, there's this theme of sort of performance or doing what's expected of you. And as we just said, we haven't read anything else by this writer, but there's some definite feminist overtones in terms of what's appropriate, like how should a house be kept, and even in her own anxieties around sort of disappearing or feeling put upon by this woman.
You, I think, are certainly more widely read in Korean literature than I am. Does this evoke other fiction that you've read from Korea?
Yes and no. I think there's been a bit of a groundswell in the past few years, and it'll be interesting to see what gets translated in the next several years. Yes. But there's definitely, I've seen even in multiple sort of major Western news outlets, things about rising female writers in Korea that are directly taking on gender roles and the patriarchy. And I don't know where Choi Jung-wha like sort of fits in this group, or if you can even say they're a group. But yeah, I think it tracks with some of the other releases that have been translated recently.
The newest novel that everybody's talking about, newly translated, Kim Ji-young, 1982. Have you read that one?
I have.
And does it kind of resonate at all? I haven't read it. I have it on my shelf, but I haven't got to it yet.
Okay. I would say it does, in the sense that I don't think that there's the same sort of creepy tone, but the same sort of themes and this idea of a common experience and a common expectation of women in terms of their domestic life, I would say, in particular. Although Kim Ji-young has a bit wider scope of life, like the workplace. And,
that's right.
Other settings. Yeah.
And the other one that came up for me, and I can't talk about it very much because I bailed on it, but The Vegetarian. There was something about this story, the creepiness. It was much more conventional than what was going on in The Vegetarian, but it did kind of bring that up, that household vibe.
Yeah.
That got very, very dark.
I haven't watched all of your backlist. I don't know why you bailed on that one, but
well, I couldn't stand it. I absolutely hated it. Yeah.
Oof. Yeah. I would say what's similar is the theme around autonomy and disappearance.
Well, I hope that our subscribers will read the story and give their comments below, because there's lots of things to talk about. So,
yeah.
Thank you very much, Grace.
Thanks, Shawn.